And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and today I am going to be doing an interview with Jonathan Ball. I invited him on the show entirely because he was the only player playing Gillian in the top 16, and that's pretty much my favorite champion. I will make a promise going forward. I will lay off talking about Gillian for at least a few weeks. I know I've done several deck breakdowns for this main character, and I don't want to oversaturate the show with content about just one champion. This show was recorded in my car while my kid was at soccer practice, so there are a few places where the audio fades in or where we kind of talk over each other, and I just couldn't clean it up in post because I didn't have my full recording suite. So I apologize to my guests and to the audience that there are some moments where the recording quality takes a little bit of a hit due to the circumstances, but I wanted to get this show out as quickly as I could, and that was the only time that worked for our schedules to get it done. So without further explanation, here is my interview with Jonathan Ball, fourth place finisher at Richmond Championships. And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and today I am joined by Jonathan Ball. Jonathan had a fourth place finish at Argent Saga Championship 2 in Richmond. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here, man.
All right, man. Well, I want to start with a little bit of background on you as a player, and we'll segue into Argent Saga, and then we'll get into the tournament. So to start off, what is your background with games? Did you start playing board games as a kid? What got you set on the path towards this card gaming?
I picked up Magic the Gathering when I was like 7 or 8, and I started playing competitively when I was in middle school, really, and then took that through high school. I have quite a few MTG, like GP top 32s, SCG top 8s. I even top 8'd a Saturday tournament, and then top 8'd the Sunday Modern tournament the next day in SCG Open. And then I got into college, and I kind of moved into like other card games. Force of Will, I went into that game, and within 2 weeks, got second place at my first GP for that tournament, right after picking up the game, and got my Worlds invite there. I top 8'd a few more GPs in that game. Played Dragon Ball Super. I've only been to 2 events, but I've gotten second place, and then I got top 32 at the other one, which was much larger, and I got my invite. And now I'm moving into Argent Saga, and I got 5th at the first 5K and 4th at this one, which is an improvement, and I'm trying to get first next time.
Are we going to see you in Columbus?
Yes.
Awesome. It seems like you've had a lot of early success with every card game that you pick up.
Yes.
I played Magic for a long time, and I did not have anywhere near the resume you just rattled off. What era of Magic did you pick up the game in?
Original Ravnica block.
Are there habits in terms of deck building or card analysis that you take from these other games that have served you well coming into Argent Saga?
Yes. This deck actually is very similar to, I would call it a Turbo Xerox deck, similar to Magic Turbo Xerox decks, where you play a lot of cheap things that don't necessarily feel powerful by themselves, but your card advantage engine is insane. So you can just get through your entire deck really fast.
What do your tournament preparation habits look like? Do you have a gauntlet that you run your decks through?
I start off, I normally always play the gauntlet in every card game. Try to jam matches against what I think are the best decks and just see what I can do. And then I usually pick one favorite deck. Like, I was probably going to play Hoenn Fizzy is what I was feeling, but with Zephyr Crystal just in the deck, because you can play it in Interstap, but it's fine. And I liked Hoenn Kite too, and I was like, these two decks are kind of dumb. But then we spent days trying to figure out just something that consistently beat it. And 3 days before the event, my roommate gave me this Gillian list, and I changed like very few cards in the deck. I think 5, 6 slots maybe total.
So is it fair to say that prior to hitting on this Gillian list that Hoenn was the champion that you were kind of focused on?
Yes, I was going to play Hoenn Fizzy.
Okay.
Most likely, before I stumbled upon this deck.
And specifically, was it the performance against Hoenn decks that appealed to you about the Gillian list, or what was it that made this list stand out?
Yes, I actually, so he stayed up overnight, and I quote from him, this is one of my favorite quotes. In a sleepless fit of frustration against Sophia, I put this together, test Hoenn against me, because we've been trying to make so many decks beat it, and so many decks could beat it, but if it draws Sophia, it's such a problem for them.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't consistently beat it. But then I jammed game after game of Hoenn Kite and then my Hoenn Fizzy build against it, and I actually just couldn't steal a single game from him. And I was like, okay, I'm taking this. And we timed him, and it would only go to game 1, which is the plan of this deck Like you're not planning for game 2 until Top Cut.
So was it your expectation for the Richmond meta that it would be largely dominated by Hoenna? Did
Yep.
you think anything about these Auron decks that were sort of rippling, kind of becoming popular going into it?
Yes. One of the friends I playtest with occasionally on tap plays Oron all the time, and I knew they were real, but I just kind of metagamed hard against Hoenna. I was like, we learned the deck in like 3 days before the tournament. I was like, I really don't have time to jam games against everything, and so we just kind of rolled with it, and it was actually just surprisingly insane in every matchup.
So, with the benefit of hindsight, how well do you feel like your Gillian list was positioned against the field that you eventually saw at Richmond?
I have defining moments where I made mistakes in every game that I lost that could have led to my victory. And I know those, the deck did not lose. I lost as a player because it is so difficult to play optimally all of the time.
That feels like a good segue point. Let's actually dig into the deck. I'm going to pull up the list here and we'll kind of go through some of the choices. We don't necessarily need to comment on every card unless you want to comment on every card. I'm not going to hold you back from that, but I could see how that might be a little tedious going card by card. Just to start looking at the units, you've got 3 ofs of the Juggernaut and Mr. Kins, and then 2 1-ofs. This is maybe the lowest unit curve I've seen in an Argent Saga deck. Do you want to talk about your curve a little bit?
Yes. So the point of the deck was I want to beat all of these other decks, and Juggernaut really stood out, especially once you get your Sophia Corona. There's no more, it's not like when you're playing against Urgon where they can just put it back on top of their deck. That's not a thing anymore. So Sophia really becomes dead. So once you Corona, you can just play a Juggernaut with Corona up. And like if they don't have the Sophia, they have to deal with a Juggernaut. And so we were just like, let's just jam 3 Juggernaut. And we have the Light Shard turned out to be actually surprisingly insane all day. With Hikari and Juggernaut and the Phantasmal Guards, you can just surprise people, and people use the 4-drop Golem that can attack dudes and is 3,500 to try to kill my Juggernaut, and I just pumped him. I was like, okay, sure. I mean, I just kill him, like straight kill him with Juggernaut. If they try to respond to kill my Juggernaut, I can just Shard Drain, and I only do 1 Hollowed Crystal activation at a time. I try to, so that because if you have to Shard Drain in response, it's going to give it barrier from your own Hollowed Crystal.
Oh, sure, yeah. Would you say that the Juggernaut is the critical unit in this deck, more so than Mayu or Harbinger or Kens?
The only reason this deck works is Mayu.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Mayu. What is it that makes Mayu the standout unit?
Infinite looping your deck forever. It's just like the way you win the game. So you sit on a Juggernaut, you literally get rid of every threat they have that's reasonable, and then what you can do is just lock them down by hitting 1 more tower than them ever, and then you just sit on Mayu, and Mayu Chronostasis every turn is the last cards in your deck. Or you can do what I did to John Tata. I use Mayu and the new Return to Slumber card and just stacked 2 of his units on top of my deck and then put Mayu right back on top of my deck, even when I wasn't decking out, just to hard lock him out of the game with putting bad units on top of his deck while I swung with Juggernaut. And they can't deal with your Mayu because they usually use all their instant speed removal on Mr. Kins. Try to get it early, waste it trying to get shards out of you with Juggernaut, so there's not enough left to deal with Mayu. And even then, I usually save. There's lots of bounce spells in the deck. You can save your own Mayu, and you also run 2 Statue at Argent Towers to get back Mayu. If Mayu is alive, which is the whole point of the deck, is to get to a late game and establish a Mayu lock where they can't get out of it and they have more towers destroyed. And so that's basically the whole linchpin of the deck, is that Mayu can loop forever. And if they don't want to concede, I'm just gonna sit there looping Mayu for like 20 minutes. That's if they do concede, then I just stall in game 2. It's basically playing like Urgon does.
Was Harbinger's ability to resurrect one of your towers relevant at any point throughout the day?
Yeah.
Was that the difference between winning and losing a game, having that 1 tower healed?
1 game was determined by that, but also nice. It's a really big dude that can't be targeted by spells.
There are so many spells. I'm going to swing down and come up from the bottom. The towers are the towers, with the exception of Tower of Surging Torrents. Now, I've been of the mind that all of the Surging Towers are kind of not great, with the exception of Shadows having that extra little bit of defense kind of makes it playable. How did Surging Torrents perform for you over the course of the day?
Insane. By far my favorite tower for my opponent to hit. So this card is actually bonkers in this. Like, you have 30 spells, so you have a huge selection. But more importantly, you have so many cards in hand. When you go to 9 cards in hand at the end of their turn, and then you go to 10 on your turn, you're going to have to discard cards because you're such a reactive deck. You're playing on your opponent's turn most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not very good. And so we were like, wait a minute. We're not hitting towers before them anyway. Like, we're just going to be, unless we have like an insane game where we just land juggernauts and they can't deal with them, but then we're winning anyway, so it doesn't matter. And so we found that Surging Torrents was just absolutely nuts in testing because you can grab anything. And if it's your third tower destroyed, it's actually nuts because you just grab Hikari and make 2 dudes at end of turn, and you probably have a ton of towers established. If it's your third tower, you probably have like, I mean, not towers, you probably have a ton of shards established. It's probably like turn 9 before 3 towers, you let 3 towers get destroyed. So you can just grab Hikari from your Surging Torrents, make 2 dudes, pump them up with hollowed crystals, and kill 2 of your opponent's towers right back.
Brutal. That's brutal. Okay, so to dig into this 30 stack of spells you've got here, are there any standouts that performed better than you expected going into the event? Were there any spells that you felt underperformed?
I was worried about a few cards in the spell slot that I didn't think were worth it, but turned out to be amazing. Phantasmal Guards, Reactive Runes, I was kind of sketch about, but they turned out really good. Reactive Runes was actually one of my favorite cards in late game. I usually try to save one because they usually only have 1 or 2 pieces of instant speed removal that can actually kill a Mayu because she's gigantic. And so if they try to kill her in response to her effect to get back Chronostasis, and if you have Reactive Runes in hand, just do that on your own Mayu.
Oh, so it ended up being more of a defensive move than bouncing a threat.
No, I only save 1 for that. I will use my other two extremely aggressively. It's a time walk. Like, you catch someone playing a Guard Hound or anything random like that you don't care about, you just put it on top of their deck and they tap out for it. So it's just a free turn.
Return to Slumber versus Shards of Winter. I see you've got 1 Slumber and 3 Shards. Is that the balance that you would continue with the benefit of hindsight now that you're through the event? I've largely looked at Slumber as sort of a replacement for Shards, so I'm a little surprised that Shards is more represented in the list than Slumber.
I really like Return to Slumber, but it doesn't happen until a water tower gets destroyed. And the way this deck plays, I have a lot of games where 0 towers are destroyed going into the late game because I am very aggressive. I will Ancient Serpent's Breath your turn 1 attack quite often. I do not care about the card advantage. It is irrelevant to this deck. What you're drawing is useless most of the time, is the philosophy of the deck, basically, because you draw so many cards. So you can just use all your cards to their best defensive capability, and you just don't want any towers destroyed. Because the deck really, it doesn't have a destroyer finisher, right? You don't have any big way to turn around the tides like a bunch of other decks do. So you kind of have to play this real attrition where your towers matter a lot more. And because of Gillian and your percentage to hit spells, you can afford to just waste spells like that. And Shards of Winter is the nuts for setting up sweepers. And you could really big brain people based on what you reveal with Gillian. A lot of time, I would hide my sweeper for multiple turns. I would never reveal it. I would even whiff on purpose. Like, I would reveal 2 cards or 3 cards instead of the finishing ray in my hand, even though I had it, and then I would hit, say, a Shards of Winter or something else on top that's 4 or more, and I would just not get it. And then my opponent would just play right into my Shards of Winter. They would play another dude out after I Shards of Winter with Swiftness normally, and I would just tap that down with something else, and then it would go back to my turn. I would finishing ray them, and they just didn't see it coming because I didn't show it to them in my hand. And a lot of people think, I guess, because it was the first time playing against Gillian, really, that you should just reveal all your spells so you draw all the cards.
Mm-hmm.
But that's absolutely not true for this ruler. You can hide information and bait people really well with the Shards of Winter. Like, it was excellent bait because it forces them, either you time walk them or they play another body, basically. And so that's really good for playing into your Chronostasis and your finishing rays.
Were there any other spells or units that were considered for the deck that ended up on the cutting room floor? And what was the reasoning for that?
So I really wanted to try a few other things, but pretty much everything that we wanted to try ended up in the sideboard.
So is this deck kind of a finished product? Do you feel like it's refined to the place where it really needs to be?
No, I think it was perfect for that meta, but I think people are going to adapt now, which is something this is a brand new card game, and I really enjoy the ability to brew and brainstorm like deck concepts and just completely change the way the game is seen. It's really fun.
You mentioned earlier that you attributed each loss directly to a misplay. It might not be the most fun, but do you recall 1 or 2 of those examples that you would want to share with us as far as what you navigated incorrectly that resulted in those losses?
Yes. I thought one of my opponents was only on 2 Ancient Serpent's Breath, and he was playing 3, and so I played a Phantasmal Guard out because I was worried about a last Quickness dude, and he didn't have one left, and if I had not played Phantasmal Guards, we actually would have established a 22-minute, and this is in top 4 play. We would have established a 22-minute Mayu loop where neither player can win. And there's no way my opponent can win a game 2 because I can hard stall better than any other deck in the game.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So basically the game plan is just Mayu loop. But I mean, that's my mistake. Like, I totally own up to making a mistake and it costing me a game. That is, I like to learn from my mistakes and improve from them.
Oh, yeah, man. If you pretend that you did everything right, then
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
no room for improvement.
Exactly. So I like to I very critically analyze games I play when I'm play testing too. I try to figure out, like, what did I do wrong? What could I have done better? How can I improve this? Even if it does come out to being like, well, sometimes you have no control over this. But this deck, it really didn't feel like that ever. There was always something I did wrong. Because you make so many decisions over the turn of the game, and a lot of times you don't even want to activate Gillian because you don't want to discard cards.
So are you riding with a full grip through most of these
Yes.
games throughout the day?
Yep.
Okay.
Discarding cards all the time. You actively want to go first in this deck because it's basically the same as going second because you draw way too many cards. And Mr. Kins is the nuts, actually. He's probably the engine of the deck, the core. He needs to die really fast. If your opponent can't kill him, he will snowball so hard that it's impossible for them to stop you.
It's definitely been kind of weird to wrap my head around how much discarding you have to do with Gillian. As I have played with her more and more, I've added more spells and done less units. Now, I hadn't gone as extreme as the list that you showed with 30 and what was it, 8 units. That's further than I pushed it. But even going, with 25 spells, you still end up discarding stuff several turns throughout the course of the game. And at first it felt terrible, but then once you kind of get into the flow of what the deck wants to do, how the champion works, it doesn't even feel like a drawback at a certain point.
So what I really like to do, this is my favorite game plan, is I try to leave as many cards as I can, especially against Hoenn decks. So they're gonna sit on lab, and you actually do not care. You want them to do this. They will sit there and draw cards all day with lab, and they will get super low in their deck. And I don't activate Gillian every time. What I do is I get to 7 and I stay there, and then whenever they play anything that makes me discard a card, I just draw another card right there because I've been using Mr. Kins the whole time. And so I just stay at 8 constantly on their turn so that their discard just keeps me at 7. I use it as basically like a tap my ruler, negate your discard.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, that feels very strong.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any notable matches, games, specific interactions that were really cool or you're particularly proud of that took place over the course of the event?
I think my feature match in top 8 was really awesome. I had a really good time playing against Ryan.
I had a very fun time watching that. I think that was probably the standout match on the stream out of everything that I saw.
Oh, thank you. That was a really hard match. I was sweating for a second. He hit me hard really fast.
In the middle of playing that, actually, when I messaged you on Facebook, I was like, I got to get this guy on the show. I love this deck. What do you predict is going to change between Richmond and Columbus? Obviously, the meta shifts a little between each event so far. Where do you think it's going to shift going forward?
This deck feels like straight busted into every matchup, honestly. Like, you just play correctly, and it's really good. So I feel like it's going to be someone's going to have to go. So the only really, really, really hard matchups were actually the Hoenn ones where they went really big on the discard. Like, they looped golems. They had the black card returning shadows to return it to their hand, the Golem of Vengeance. And they had Demon of the Evil Eyes, like multiples of those, and multiple Golem of Vengeance. And they just went like really big on the discard plan. If they go really big on the discard plan, it can really hurt you. In the long run, you can still play around it kind of, but those are the hardest decks is when they go really big on the discard. But it's really hard to do that game 1, right? Because if you play a bunch of 5 and 6 drops into any kind of aggro deck like Liam, so I feel like we're actually entering into like kind of like a triangle meta, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have a control deck and you have an aggro deck, and then you have like a really big hand control deck. Because that can really hurt you. If they discard a ton of high impact cards and leave you with cards you don't want in your hand, it really, really, really hurts when you don't have enough spells to get cards off the top of your deck with Gillian. And that can happen when they're discarding you with Demon of the Evil Eye every single turn and forcing you to answer their board.
Do you think that's the direction Dark is headed, is going harder on the discard strategy?
If they want to beat this deck, they have to. They do not have a choice.
Fair enough.
But
that kind of sums up where hold on, I heard a but. Did you have something else to add on that? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Was that Hoenn, if they go big on the discard, like I think they'll have to beat this deck consistently, they are gonna lose more to every other matchup. So I don't know. It's a metagame call, and the problem that this deck brings, I think, also is the same as Urgon, where you don't get a sideboard against this deck. Like, it's not a relevant factor in the matchup.
Do you think it would hurt the game if we just switched to a best of 1 format?
Yes. Top cut sideboards do matter a lot.
Well, okay. let me rephrase the question. If Swiss was played best of one, do you think that would hurt the game?
I've never been proposed that question before. Let me think about that. Just Swiss rounds? Probably. I think sideboarding is really important in most matchups.
Okay. So my other favorite game is Versus, and that's exactly how they do it. Swiss is best of one, and after the cut, it becomes best of three. But there's no sideboarding in that game, even when the matches are best of three. And initially, I really didn't like it, but I came from a Magic background. Best of three was kind of ingrained in me. And now, years later, I mean, I don't necessarily think it's better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah.
And given how so many Argent Saga events have turned into best of one, even though the rules say otherwise, I feel like it's maybe something we should be discussing. Although I saw that post from Jim today where he said that they do not want to consider best of one. They just want to figure out a way to make the games end within time, which I'm fine with that too.
Me too.
If you had to choose one, if you were part of the design team and you had to make the game cater to the kitchen table crowd or the hardcore tournament player, which direction would you prefer to see the game head?
I think you need to balance both. I think tournaments should have like healthy metas, kind of. And the meta was very healthy for this tournament. There were a lot of different diverse decks. Helena was very represented, but she was very represented in the tournament overall too, so that was to be expected. Just like ratio speaking, it had to happen. And a lot of really good players played that deck. It definitely deserved to be in the top 16 with Helena. But I think it was only like, 8 Helena decks in top 16?
I would
the rest was
back
diverse.
and look at the numbers, but yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think you need to keep a diverse metagame, and that usually keeps both parties happy. It's hard to do though. Casual is kind of more important for making money because I feel like more players in games are usually casual than competitive.
I think the casuals are more likely to abandon ship when the meta feels bad too.
Yep.
So how willing to make changes and how quickly ARG reacted with even if Aragon's not objectively overpowered, he created kind of a feels bad situation around the game. And by taking that out of the way, I think that makes it better for the hardcore tournament players because you don't have to deal with Aragon with no checks, but also the people who have that kind of casual interest can go, oh, look, they made a change because the finals were 3 hours long. Do you have a favorite card in the game?
Yeah, right now I'd have to say it's Mayu.
Specifically because of her performance in this deck?
Just the absolute degeneracy she brings to the table when you play her. She's absolutely bonkers.
It does seem like her and Sylphia are kind of just like a tier above all the other legendaries.
Oh, I think Sylphia has nothing on Mayu.
No? Mayu's the better of the two?
Oh, yeah. And then Juggernauts is just like one of the most absurd cards I've seen in any card game. That card is bonkers. It's like, I describe it similar to Aetherling from Magic, where it's just like so unkillable. It's really hard to deal with.
Are there any effects that are not currently in the game that you would like to see introduced?
I want more ways to interact with exiling things and removing them from the game.
Like interact kind of like the Voidfire Dragon where you can bring things out of the exile zone back, or just more ways to expel things out of the game in general?
Both. Yeah, like I actually agree with both. I was only meaning to put things in exile. I feel like there needs to be more exile removal in general to deal with all the graveyard shenanigans.
Yeah, there's a lot of KO
yeah,
pile
like
stuff.
I do like all of the new scavenger card is amazing. I love that card. But I still feel like I miss Path to Exile a lot, Swords to Plowshares, and I feel like something like even if it's costed like 6 or 5 at instant speed, just exile a dude for 5. I would play that and it'd be fine. You wouldn't want it against most dudes, but like there's some dudes in this game like Mayu that just needs to go. You cannot let that thing stick around or it will end the game by itself. And then if you bring it back, it's
shorten
ridiculous.
games.
Yes.
To take some of these big boss monster loops out of the top end, I think would do an awful lot of heavy lifting to bringing the overall game time down.
I completely agree. It's just there's no reasonable answers for it at instant speed. There's nothing that you can really do about Mayu loops. You can Corona it, but a lot of times they're running like Statue at Argent Tower because again it only destroys it.
Yeah, and then it just comes right back.
Yep.
You mentioned Bone Scavenger. Were there any of the other spoilers that came out today that really stood out to you?
Yes. The black each player sacrifices a creature card is great.
That seems bonkers, doesn't it?
Yes, I really like it as an answer to Juggernaut, actually, which is in my opinion, Juggernaut's one of the biggest problem cards in the format right now. And that card is, as long as you can clear every other creature on their board, I mean, isn't hard against this deck. It may be hard against other Juggernaut decks, but that card is really good against Juggernaut. Card is just really good in general, in my opinion.
Well, with all the bounce effects you've got available in both water and air, it seems like you could play that and the supposed drawback is completely nullified. Oh, I have to sacrifice a creature. I'll just bounce it back to my hand.
Yep.
No big deal. That's easy.
So that's true. However, sometimes it's harder to do that because you can't. A lot of times you're not going to have Mizu active on your guys because you need to tap them and then return them to your hand, and you don't have 3 shards, so you can't Mizu it unless you have 2, which is a waste. But you could like Ancient Servant's Breath your Mr. Kins and then Shard Drain to put something on top of your deck. I did do that quite often. And Tidal Rush is pretty good too. Tidal Rush is really good with Mayu. Like, if you didn't have a Juggernaut established, Tidal Rush on your opponent's turn does so much with Mayu. You can bounce one of the dudes, put another on top, put Mayu back in your hand. It's gross.
I definitely ended up being surprised at how good Tidal Rush was. When I initially read that card, actually, Shard Drain just felt so bad, both on Juggernaut and Tidal Rush. It wasn't as bad on Serpent's Breath, but really, given how these games play out, it feels like Shard Drain is barely even a cost.
Yeah,
just
it really isn't much of a cost at all for what it gives you. It's because you drag the point of this deck is really to just drag the game one forever. Like you want to get to a spot where you can Shard Drain multiple times in one turn and really not care. You're gonna point 3 cards in your hand at my Juggernaut. Sure, dude. Like, how does that help you? I'll go down to 7 shards and go right back up to 8 next turn.
Well, and if Fizzy's your spirit, Shard Draining those crystals to just cycle the top of your deck on top of everything else. It just I feel like there's some places within the game where they didn't quite know exactly how to cost things, and there's just some kinks that need to get worked out. It's such a new game, so I'm not like mad about it, but it definitely feels like Shard Drain on the surface level feels impactful, but in practice just isn't.
It's only because of the length of the games, really. I would say that if games sped up and aggro gets better, you'll see Shard Drain become much more of an issue. Where, like, you say you have to tap out to play Juggernaut on 5. What if they point 2 things at it? Do you really want to go down to 3 shards against an aggro deck?
Yeah, that would feel bad.
Exactly. And so, like, the faster the games get, the more impactful Shard Drain will feel. For this deck, it just looks and feels ridiculous because, I mean, the whole deck is kind of silly, honestly. But it's not really a cost in this deck. You don't care.
All right. Well, that kind of brings me to the end of everything that I had scripted out that I wanted to make sure we touched on. Right. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention with regard to Richmond, your deck, meta predictions, anything at all?
Oh, yeah. So 2 things I forgot to mention, actually, that are really important. Sola. The card is great main board. Mr. Kins being able to scout is amazing. And also, your Juggernaut swinging for free and then untapping is also nutty. Sola is actually just the nuts in this deck. I was extremely surprised by how good Sola was. And then my second point I have to make is that Buckeye, as if you watched the feature match I was on, Buckeye is actually insane in post board against aggro decks because you throw in 2 Astonishing Betrayal and that card is disgusting with Buckeye.
Do you think he's better than Sola?
Not main board.
Okay.
Because main board, every matchup usually, except for Liam and other like hard aggro decks, I want Sola to untap my things every turn so I can scout, because I don't want to hit a red tower ever. I can hit every other tower with Juggernaut. I just want to leave red tower for last usually, or I'll hit it down with just a Hikari on board when I don't have a Juggernaut. So I usually try to scout out all the towers with Mr. Kins using Sola, because it's not even a real cost, because it just untaps it anyway. So you can still bounce it back to draw the card and set up your deck again the next turn. But I usually try to, scout 3 times, use Sola. Juggernaut forever with Sola. I try to not use Chrono as long as possible, so Sola is still active, because it's just nuts. But when you put in Buckeye and Astonishing Betrayal, like on stream I blew up his Raging Shard Beast with Astonishing Betrayal after he hit my token. That just felt amazing. It's just gross. Astonishing Betrayal also turns Surging Torrents into a tutor or 1-drop removal. So it basically turns it into another Tower of Fire, which is like sick. I'll take that any day.
Yeah, that's pretty good, man. Was there anything else you wanted to plug here at the end, promote, direct people's attention to?
Not really. Just big shout out to my roommate Roger for giving me almost this entire deck.
All right. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you coming on the show, making the time for this. I was really interested to get a chance to talk to you about this deck list, and it was really fun to watch something other than Hoenna there on the stream. So thanks again for making the time, man.
Thank you.
Well, when you win Columbus, we'll have you on again. Sound good?
Oh, that sounds great.
All right, man. We'll catch up with you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes my interview with Jonathan Ball. Again, Jonathan took 4th place at Richmond Championships playing Gillian Sola. Until next time, go win some games.